I get calls all the time from people from coast to coast thinking about investing in Austin real estate. So in this little episode, I'm going to go through my advice that I give first-time investors. Hey, I'm Abby Husbands, and I'm a realtor in Austin, Texas. So I get calls all the time from out-of-state investors wanting to invest in Texas real estate. It's affordable right now to buy a little property in the outskirts of Austin, but there are several things that you're going to need to consider before you jump right in to the rental property pool. And the first thing that I tell everybody, which is the first thing that I tell any of my clients, whether you're looking to invest or buy your first home or buy a vacation home, is get with a good qualified lender. As an investor, you're going to have to put down at least 20 to 25% for an investment home. And the reason for that is because there is no mortgage insurance for investment properties. So you're going to have that cash ready to go on top of your closing costs. So I just tell everyone, get with a great lender, go over your options, and go from there. Another thing about investment properties and on the mortgage side is that your interest rate is going to tend to be a little higher than if you were just buying an owner-occupied property. So have your lender run all the numbers for you before you decide that you want to start purchasing investment properties. So for argument's sake, I'm just going to be discussing the Austin market, obviously, because that's what I know. I'm an expert on the Austin market. I live here, I work here. So this may not pertain to every city, but this is how it works here. So one of the first things that you're going to want to consider is, does the neighborhood have a very strong rental market? You really don't want much of a vacancy rate in between tenants. So I would pick an area that has a low or no vacancy rate. We do have an incredibly strong rental market here in Austin, and that's because 150 people move here every day. That takes into consideration the people that are leaving, but we have people moving here every day, and a lot of my clients that are relocating here feel like they're under a lot of pressure. So a lot of them opt to lease a house that first year before they can figure out where they really want to live. So you want to pick a neighborhood that has a strong rental history. That's my number 2 tip. Number 3 is you're going to want to know your margins. So you purchase a property or you're looking at purchasing a property. There are a lot of things that go into it on the investor side. Things like the vacancy rate, which we just talked about. You want that to be low or none. You also have about a 1% maintenance allowance that I tell people just to count on if anything goes wrong with that home every year. So you'll want to set aside about 1% of the purchase price just in case. You're also going to have to pay your property taxes, and that's very important because property taxes in Austin vary depending on what part of the city. So oddly enough, Austin is a lower tax rate than some of the more affordable suburbs on the outside of town. And that's because they're still building up their infrastructure, still building schools, roads. So the tax rate in some of the suburbs are higher. However, the price point is lower. So it may end up being a wash, but there are still pockets outside of Austin in the suburbs that have a low tax rate. So that's another thing to consider. Something else to consider is, what is the monthly or yearly HOA fee? It's kind of rare these days to find a house in an established subdivision outside of Austin that's affordable, that does not have an HOA fee. So you want to be very aware that it may be difficult to find a house that does not have an HOA fee. I also have clients that are okay with purchasing condos and townhomes, and those HOA fees tend to be a lot higher than if you're purchasing a single family home. So just roll that into the whole equation and keep in mind that it's probably going to be unavoidable. So there's also things on a monthly basis that, do you want to cover, or do you want your tenants to cover. Things like pest control, lawn care. If you're in an HOA, there are a lot of my investors who choose to take care of the lawn themselves because they could get fined if for some reason the yard isn't being taken care of. So that's just another thing to consider. So that's tip number 3. My next one is keep in mind that Austin, Texas is a buy and hold city, which means you're probably not going to be making a lot of money on a monthly basis from your rental income. If anything, you'll be breaking even. But because our property values increase on average about 4 to 5% per year, it's a great investment opportunity. There have been little pockets of Austin in the past few years that have seen 9 and 10% property values increases. It's great as far as if you're purchasing a house and you're just letting it sit for 5-10 years. That's great. But if you think you're going to be making a ton of cash flow on a monthly basis, that is probably not going to happen. But you just have to wrap your head around it and keep in mind that that's the Austin market. So another thing that I tell people is don't buy a fixer-upper. Don't buy a foreclosure. Don't buy something that looks cheap, but then when you get into it, it's going to need a ton of work because then you're just really defeating the purpose. There are a lot of homes out there in Austin that you can still purchase that might need some minor repairs, paint, carpet, flooring. But for the most part, don't assume that you can go in, buy a cheap property, throw 20 or 30 grand into it, and then turn around and get it up to snuff, because you have no idea, especially if you're not a general contractor or if you don't know a really amazing one. So don't buy a fixer-upper. That's my advice. Another word of advice is get a lower priced point home, especially for your first investment property. So get something, I think in Austin, my little sweet spot is between $215 and $235 with low HOA and lower tax rate. Those are great houses to buy now because they will increase in value. If you want to buy something that's more expensive, you can, but just realize you may not be making money on the front end. That's something that goes along with that buy and hold. So, but we have plenty out there. A lot of my clients purchase within that lower price point, lower HOA, lower property tax rates. But that's just another thing that I tell my clients to shoot for. And my last tip is just be realistic. I mean, this is your first investment property. It's going to be incredibly stressful if you're buying from out of state or out of town, but just listen to and find a great realtor who works with investors and investment properties. It will really work out in the long run if you find someone that knows what they're doing. If you are out of state or out of town, I use my virtual reality house hunting system. If you've seen in some of my previous videos where I will upload a video to virtual reality platform and then you can look at it before you even come into town so that you can decide if that's something that you want to go to. Another thing, aside from being realistic, you also have to realize that the Austin market is hot. So when a fabulous little rental property comes on the market, you're going to have to be able to pull the trigger pretty quickly. So if you find a good agent that you trust and you can trust their advice, then that might make it easier. So thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you found this informative. If you love it, please give me a big thumbs up. And if you like my videos, please subscribe, or you will be alerted whenever I put out one of my weekly videos. So thanks so much and have a good one.